November 1944, the Hürtgen Forest, near the German border. A battery of 4 German 10.5 centimeter field howitzers sits concealed beneath dripping pine branches. Just as the horizon behind them flashes, the American retaliation arrives with terrifying violence. Heavy 155mm shells tear into the forest canopy of the firing line. The drivers would wrestle their burdened loads through the trees and onto the logging tracks heading rearward. They had successfully escaped the explosive grid, but their safety was only temporary. Getting the gun moving was merely the first half of the problem. What happened when these heavy, crippled columns finally hit their designated escape routes? Once the gun crews dragged their howitzers out of the firing pits, they faced the secondary road network of the German frontier. On the staff maps back at Army headquarters, these routes appeared as crisp, solid lines indicating macadam lanes, logging trails, and farm roads connecting the defensive sectors. The mathematical doctrine of survival relied entirely on these lines being open. But the map was a fiction. The physical reality of a road behind the Hürtgen Forest in late November was a pulverized trench of mud. For weeks, these vital arteries had absorbed relentless punishment. Allied tactical bombers had systematically hunted the intersections, dropping heavy ordnance that blew massive craters into the roadbeds. Weeks of steady autumn rain had filled these depressions, hiding their true depth beneath opaque pools of muddy, freezing water. At the same time, retreating German heavy armor had ground the surviving macadam into paste, splintering trees and vaporizing the exact coordinates the German guns occupied moments before. Concussive waves shake the retreating column. The wide steel tracks of 40-ton Panther tanks had chewed up the stone foundations, turning once firm country lanes into parallel ruts stretching feet deep into the earth. Into this decaying landscape plunged the fleeing artillery batteries. A worn half-track, dragging an inert 2-ton weapon, struggled just to maintain forward momentum. The mud was not simply wet dirt. It was a viscous slurry that packed into the running gear of the vehicles and the heavy wooden spokes of the gun carriages, adding hundreds of pounds of dead weight to the suspension. Furthermore, these roads were rarely empty. A displaced artillery unit did not have a clear path to its secondary firing position. The crews had to navigate a landscape choked with the wreckage of a collapsing supply chain. They were forced to weave around broken-down transport trucks, abandoned infantry carts, and the bloated carcasses of dead draft horses. If a towing vehicle slipped off the narrow crest of a rut and into a flooded bomb crater, the sudden, violent jolt transferred immense shock directly through the towing pintle into the axle of the gun. Moving a heavy battery under these conditions ceased to be a rapid tactical shift. It became an agonizing, mechanical death march. Drivers rode their clutches, engines boiling over as they tried to muscle past the scattered debris. The speed of a retreating column frequently dropped to a crawling pace of less than 2 miles an hour. The environment itself acted as a massive friction multiplier. Shrapnel shreds the empty camouflage nets left behind in the mud. But the German battery commander, looking back from the cab of his lead vehicle, every mile traveled degraded the towing machinery further. A snapped track pin or a blown tire in the middle of a narrow forest lane did not just stop a single vehicle. It blocked the entire column. The exhausted gun crews would have to dismount in the freezing rain, unhook the heavy weapon, and attempt to manually winch it out of the way, burning through their remaining physical stamina just to clear the path. The doctrine of the rapid displacement had successfully saved the German artillery from the initial time-on-target barrage. The American explosives had missed the steel, but they had forced the guns out of concealment and onto these decaying arteries. The artillery pieces were now trapped in motion. A 2-ton howitzer bogged down in freezing clay cannot simply detour through a dense pine forest. It must follow the road, no matter how degraded that road has become. The Americans could not see the individual guns struggling in the mud, but they did not need to. They held the same topographic maps. If a German unit was forced to run, there were only a handful of paths it could possibly take. The question was how the American forces would exploit the inevitable friction of this ruined infrastructure once the guns were forced to move. The topography of the German borderlands dictated a fatal geometry. A camouflaged firing pit can be dug almost anywhere in a forest. Breathes a sigh of relief. They beat the math. According to the rules of artillery warfare, he has just executed a masterpiece of battlefield survival, but movement is strictly governed by the earth. A muddy logging trail eventually meets a paved provincial route. Provincial routes converge at villages. Villages inevitably sit on rivers. To travel from a compromised primary position to a pre-surveyed secondary site 6 miles away, a retreating German battery could not move in a straight line. They had to obey the landscape. This meant every escape route eventually passed through a geographic bottleneck. It might be a single intact stone bridge spanning a swollen, freezing creek. It might be a narrow defile cut through a steep, wooded ridge, or a vital crossroads connecting 2 valleys. The German artillery commander, who successfully pulled his heavy howitzers out of the mud, soon found his exhausted column approaching one of these mandatory transit points. But he was never alone. The American counter-battery system was not reacting to just one gun. It was systematically engaging the entire sector. When the time-on-target barrages fell, they flushed out multiple German positions simultaneously. Dozens of disparate units were forced into motion at once. Because the broader road network was already destroyed by craters and mud, all these separate, crawling elements were funneled toward the exact same surviving choke points. When the limbered 10.5-centimeter howitzers reached the stone bridge, or the narrow defile, they hit a solid wall of stationary traffic. His unit moved exactly as Doctrine demanded. They took no direct hits. His guns are perfectly intact. His optical sights are unharmed. A retreating artillery battery would find its path blocked by a broken-down supply truck, a column of wounded infantry, and a horse-drawn rations cart with a shattered wooden wheel. The pristine mathematical timetable of the rapid displacement instantly collapsed. A unit that had executed a frantic 3-minute escape to avoid annihilation was now sitting idling for 2 hours in a valley, breathing heavy diesel exhaust and listening to the cries of dying draft horses. The mud, the ruined roads, and the geography had conspired to stack the surviving German forces shoulder to shoulder, stripping away their mobility. The American command understood this geometry perfectly. They did not need complex radar or sound-ranging equipment to find these massive traffic jams. The standard-issue topographic maps told them exactly where the funnels were. While the counter-battery network pounded the suspected firing sites in the forest, other American batteries executed scheduled interdiction missions. They simply dropped heavy shells onto the known crossroads, the surviving bridges, and the narrow valleys, firing blind at the map. A German battery caught in one of these traffic jams faced a lethal dilemma. The blind harassment fire could arbitrarily wipe them out, as they sat trapped bumper to bumper. But waiting for the bottleneck to clear during daylight hours exposed them to a much more terrifying threat. His men are uninjured. By every metric of traditional combat, his battery remains 100% effective. He checks his map. The American artillery was only the hammer that forced the German units out of their hidden bunkers, stripped them of their camouflage, and packed them into these congested valleys. The ground was just the anvil. The artillery had done its job by trapping the German guns in the open. Now, a completely different weapon system was sweeping the skies above the cloud layer, searching for exactly this kind of concentrated, paralyzed steel. Trapped in the muddy defile, the German artillerymen listened to the idling engines of the stalled column. They were safe from the American counter-battery grid, but their survival now depended entirely on the weather. Through the brutal autumn of 1944, a thick, freezing overcast was the only armor the retreating columns had left. As long as the sky remained a dense gray ceiling, the bottleneck was just an agonizing delay. But if the wind shifted and the clouds broke, the trap closed. High above the cloud layer, American air power was waiting. Squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts flew relentless armed reconnaissance missions over the German rear. These fighter-bomber pilots were not hunting for heavily camouflaged artillery pits in the deep forest. Finding a single concealed gun from 10,000 feet was nearly impossible. The pilots did not have to. Directs his column toward a pre-surveyed secondary position 6 miles away and expects to be ready for new fire missions before dawn. The American artillery had already done the hard work of flushing the guns out of the trees, forcing them onto the roads, and packing them tightly together at the river crossings. When a gap in the clouds opened, a Thunderbolt pilot looking down would see a dark, miles-long ribbon of congested vehicles sitting motionless against the snow and mud. The aircraft would roll onto its wing and push into a steep dive. The pilots did not need to score a direct hit on the heavy steel breech of a howitzer. The American strategy was not about melting the guns, it was about severing their mobility. The Thunderbolts unleashed barrages of high-velocity rockets and strafed the column with heavy 50-caliber machine guns. The unarmored supply trucks carrying the vital artillery shells shattered instantly. The engine blocks of the towing half-tracks were cracked open by armor-piercing incendiary rounds, their precious synthetic fuel igniting in pooling fires on the muddy road. For the batteries relying on animal power, the result was a massacre. The screaming dive of the fighter bombers sent terrified draft horses thrashing into the ditches, breaking their legs and tearing their harnesses to pieces. But when dawn finally breaks, the battery does not exist. 14 hours after their perfect escape, an advancing American infantry patrol in less than 5 minutes. The airstrike would end, and the aircraft would climb back into the sky. On the ground, the German gunners might emerge from the muddy ditches to find their heavy 10.5 centimeter howitzers physically untouched. The barrels were unbent, the rifling was pristine, the optical sights were perfect, but the weapon was dead. Without its prime mover, a 2-ton field gun sitting on a ruined road was effectively a static piece of landscape. It could not be pushed for 6 miles by human muscle. It could not be fired accurately from a crowded, burning traffic jam. The battery had survived the mathematical radar grid, only to be stripped of its mobility by the air patrols. The American system had used one weapon to force the error, and another to execute the punishment. For the German High Command, the lesson was immediate and brutal. Fleeing an American barrage during daylight hours was suicide. The rapid displacement doctrine, written to save them, was instead feeding their finest artillery units to the fighter bombers. The countermeasure had to be adjusted. To survive the sky, the German batteries were ordered to hold their fire during the day. Finds the German guns sitting silently by the side of a rutted country lane, miles behind the original front line. The barrels are cold, or remain hidden in their pits, regardless of the incoming shells. They would only execute their mandatory displacements when the sun went down. The cover of darkness would hide them from the aircraft, allowing the half-tracks and horses to pull the guns to the secondary positions unseen. But this desperate shift in timing only exposed the artillery crews to the final, unseen friction of the American system. Moving at night seemed like the only logical choice, but the darkness demanded a terrible cost of its own. The sun sets over the German borderlands, bringing a temporary halt to the American air patrols. The cloud ceiling turns pitch black. For the German artillery crews waiting in the freezing mud, this is the signal to finally execute their delayed escape. The strict doctrine of rapid displacement, suspended during daylight, resumes under the cover of night. But the darkness on the winter front is absolute. And moving a heavy battery blind comes with a terrifying new set of physical laws. Strict blackout conditions are enforced. Even a single hooded flashlight or a careless match could draw an immediate barrage from American forward observers looking for movement. The drivers of the half-tracks must navigate the ruined logging roads entirely by feel, staring into a black abyss. The breech blocks have been removed and thrown into a nearby flooded ditch. The towing half-tracks sit motionless, abandoned in the deep ruts, while the frozen steering levers vibrate in their hands. The environment that crippled them during the day is now entirely invisible. A massive bomb crater filled with freezing rain looks exactly like a flat stretch of wet asphalt in the dark. A driver creeping along at 2 miles an hour cannot see the edge of the deep ruts chewed by the heavy tanks. Suddenly, the lead half-track slips. The heavy tracks lose their bite on the crest of a muddy rut, sliding sideways into a flooded ditch. The momentum drags the 2-ton howitzer behind it violently into the same trench. In daylight, the crew would immediately dismount, assess the angle, and use thick wooden beams to lever the gun out. In the pitch black, there is only chaos. Gunners stumble into waist-deep water, feeling blindly for the tow cables with freezing hands. They cannot see what the heavy wooden wheels of the artillery piece are pressed against. The panicked driver drops the clutch, trying to muscle the load back onto the road. Worn transmission gears scream in the dark, but the angle of the ditch is wrong. The heavy wooden spokes of the gun carriage are wedged tightly against a submerged slab of jagged rock. The cold rain has turned the forest floor into a thick, clinging paste. At a signal from the battery commander, the lanyards are pulled. There are no craters nearby. There are no bloodstains. There are no bodies. An elite, highly trained artillery unit has been effectively wiped. As the half-track surges forward, the immense strain transfers directly through the towing pintle, with a sharp, metallic crack that echoes through the trees. The heavy axle of the howitzer snaps. The battery is instantly paralyzed. They cannot repair a broken carriage axle in the mud. They cannot wait for a heavy recovery vehicle because none are coming. And they cannot leave the prime mover attached until dawn, because the American fighter bombers will return with the light. The battery commander is forced to make a decision that contradicts all of his training. To save his men and his surviving vehicles, he must sacrifice the weapon. The crew fumbles in the dark, unhooking the heavy trails from the towing pintle. They open the breech, pull out the firing block to render the gun useless to the advancing Americans, and throw the precision machine steel into the flooded crater. The half-track drives away into the night, leaving a perfectly intact, irrecoverable artillery piece sinking into the freezing clay. This silent disaster repeated itself across the entire Western Front. Night displacement did not save the German artillery from the American mathematical grid. It merely changed the mechanism of their destruction. The forced movements in the dark snapped axles, shattered wheels, from the German order of battle in a single night. Not a single piece of American shrapnel touched its armor, burned out failing clutches, and separated cohesive fighting units into lost, straggling convoys. Navigation broke down. Drivers took wrong turns at unmarked crossroads, driving their guns directly into American infantry patrols. The strategy of displacement had successfully protected the steel from high explosives, but it demanded a level of mechanical endurance the German military no longer possessed. The guns were surviving the fire, but dying in the mud. The question was, What this relentless, unseen attrition looked like when the sun finally rose on the end of the campaign, when the American infantry patrol walked down that rutted logging road in the Hurtgen forest the next morning, they found the 4 German 10.5-centimeter howitzers sitting exactly where the exhausted crews had left them. There were no blast craters. There were no bloodstains in the mud. The opening mystery of the dead battery is finally resolved not by a miraculous weapon, but by mechanical collapse. The German battery commander had executed his perfect displacement. He had beaten the mathematical grid. He had survived the high explosives, but in doing so, he had destroyed his own unit. The commander believed he was fighting an artillery duel, a contest of ballistics and timing. Not a single American bullet was fired at its crews, yet the battery is entirely dead. For the German commanders trying to hold the line, but the American counter-battery network was not fundamentally a system for shattering steel. It was a displacement engine. It weaponized the strict German survival doctrine against the decaying German reality. By forcing the heavy guns out of their concealed pits, the Americans shifted the battle from a tactical fight to a logistical one. A howitzer dug deeply into a reverse slope requires only ammunition and men. A howitzer dragged across a ruined road network requires synthetic fuel, durable transmission gears, heavy tires, uncracked axles, and healthy draft horses. The American system demanded a massive mechanical toll every time it forced a unit to run. Eventually, the German supply chain simply ran out of currency to pay it. The machinery that achieved this victory was entirely invisible to the men freezing on the ground. It was built by technicians in damp dugouts, reading spools of photographic paper. It was maintained by radar operators, tracking invisible arcs in the sky. It relied on American quartermasters, ensuring thousands of heavy proximity fuses reached the frontline batteries, and mechanics working through the night to keep Thunderbolt fighter bombers armed and in the air. This vast, synchronized apparatus operated with one simple goal: deny the enemy the ability to remain stationary. Against this massive, well-fed machine stood the exhausted human and animal muscle of the German military. The men who actually had to pry. This was a creeping nightmare. They were losing vital fire support units that were successfully surviving the enemy barrages. The heavy steel spades out of the freezing clay, the drivers nursing screaming engines, the gunners who pushed 2-ton carriages through the pitch black until their bodies gave out, only to hear a wooden wheel shatter against a submerged rock. They were defeated not by a brilliant flanking maneuver, but by the relentless friction of a system that stripped away their options until there was nothing left to do but remove the breech blocks and walk away in the dark. The campaign across the German borderlands left behind a unique kind of battlefield graveyard. The forests and valleys were not just littered with the burned wreckage of destroyed armor. They were filled with hundreds of perfectly intact artillery pieces. Their barrels were cold. Their optical sights were unbroken. They were left tilting silently in flooded ditches and deep ruts, serving as quiet monuments to an army that successfully escaped the fire, only to realize it no longer had the strength to survive the road. How could a fully intact battery simply dissolve in the dark? To understand what erased these guns from the map, we first have to look at what they were running from. The German crews knew the American retaliation was coming, but what they did not understand was that the high explosives missing them in the forest were only the first visible layer of a much larger machine. To see the trap they were walking into, we must first understand the terrifying speed of the American mathematical grid that forced them to move. The death of the German battery began with a wire, miles away from the firing pits in the Hurtgen forest, buried under inches of cold mud and stretching across the American lines. Thin strands of copper connecting an array of microphones fed back to a dimly lit dugout. The guns bark in rapid succession, sending a volley of high explosives arcing toward the American lines miles away. Here, an American technician watched a ribbon of photographic paper spool out of a machine. When the German howitzers fired, they created a low-frequency shockwave. It rolled across the battlefield, invisible to the human eye, but the microphones felt it. The shockwave hit the closest microphone first, causing a needle in the dugout to jump. A fraction of a second later, the wave hit the second microphone, then the third. The distance between the jumps on the paper strip gave the American technicians an exact time delay. Using the speed of sound, adjusted for that day's air temperature and wind direction, they drew intersecting arcs on a map. Where the lines crossed, the German guns were sitting. This was sound ranging. It was not new, but by the winter of 1944, the American Army had weaponized it with industrial efficiency, and sound was only one wire in the net. In forward observation posts, spotters with optical instruments and stopwatches logged the exact millisecond they saw a muzzle flash against the dark tree line. They keyed their field telephones, sending azimuths back to a central command post. If the flash was hidden by rain and the sound was distorted by hills, the Americans had a final, inescapable tool. Sweeping the sky behind the front lines were the invisible beams of artillery locating radar. Originally designed to track aircraft, these modified sets now tracked the German artillery shells themselves while they were still in the air. By mapping the arc, the empty brass casings bounce into the mud, hissing in the damp air, but the gun crews do not wait to observe their hits of the incoming shell. The radar operators could calculate the trajectory backward. They did not need to see or hear the gun. The shell itself pointed a mathematical arrow directly back to its barrel. Inside an American fire direction center, all these inputs converged. Officers working at folding tables cross-referenced the sound records, the flash reports, and the radar plots. Within moments, they had a precise, verified grid coordinate. The calculation was passed down a network of field telephones to dozens of waiting American artillery batteries. They did not aim one gun at the target. They aimed battalions, using staggered firing times. Based on their distance from the target, the American crews loaded heavy shells, fitted with proximity fuses, designed to detonate in the air and shower the ground with razor-sharp steel. When the fire command was given, the shells left barrels miles apart, flying through the sky at different trajectories, timed to arrive at the exact same fraction of a second. This was the time-on-target barrage. For the German gun crews waiting in the forest, this meant that within 3 to 5 minutes of pulling their own lanyards, the sky above them would suddenly tear open. There would be no warning whistle, just an instant, crushing deluge of high explosives raining down from every direction at once. The German artillery arm realized very quickly that camouflage netting and deep trenches were useless against this system. You could not hide from sound and radar. The American mathematical grid was absolute. They do not cheer. They immediately begin a frantic, desperate drill. They know the brutal mathematics of the Western Front. If armor and earth could not save them, the German command decided that the only defense left was time. They had to break the math by simply not being there when the answer arrived. To survive the American counter-battery fire, the German army was forced to rewrite its rules of engagement. The solution to the American mathematical net was written into the daily orders of the German artillery arm. It was a doctrine born of pure survival. For generations, the primary instinct of the heavy gunner had been to dig in. A battery would find a concealed reverse slope, dig deep revetments, lay out thick telephone lines, and stockpile hundreds of heavy shells. A well-placed unit could dominate a sector for weeks, delivering continuous fire from a fortress of earth and timber. By the winter of 1944, that instinct was a death sentence. To stay in one place was to invite the American radar and sound-ranging network to map your exact coordinates. So, the German command enforced a harsh, inflexible rule. The new math dictated that a battery could no longer fire until it ran out of targets. It could only fire until its time expired. Orders limited fire missions to a strict handful of salvos. A unit might be authorized to fire for exactly 3 minutes. The moment the first high-explosive shell left the barrel, 2 years earlier, they might have had 20 minutes before the enemy located them. Now, they have perhaps 4. A stopwatch in the battery commander's hand began ticking. When the needle hit the allotted limit, the order to cease fire was absolute. It did not matter if the American infantry was advancing. It did not matter if German frontline troops were begging for continued support over the radio. The lanyards were dropped, the guns were hooked up to their prime movers, and the unit evacuated. To make this system work, an artillery officer had to survey a primary position, an alternate position, and a supplementary fallback. Before the first shot was ever fired, escape routes were chosen, and firing data for the secondary site was pre-calculated. Occasionally, retreating crews left behind timed smoke pots or small explosive charges in their empty pits. These small detonations simulated continued muzzle flashes, tricking American optical spotters into pouring heavy counter-barrages into abandoned patches of forest while the real artillery slipped quietly away. On paper, this displacement doctrine was a brilliant countermeasure. It turned the overwhelming American firepower against itself, absorbing thousands of tons of Allied artillery shells with empty mud. The German battery survived, preserving its men and its weapons to fight another day. But this survival tactic hid a severe operational compromise. Every time a German gun was forced to limber up and move, it was silent. The heavy steel spades are pried loose from the frozen earth. The split trails, carrying the weight of the 2-ton guns, are lifted by straining crews. It could not support the infantry while traveling between waypoints. By forcing the displacement, the American system was effectively neutralizing the German artillery for hours at a time without having to actually destroy a single piece of steel. Yet, the German gunners believed they were successfully cheating the system. They were escaping the explosions. The doctrine of the rapid displacement was keeping them alive against impossible odds. But that belief rested on a highly fragile assumption. The doctrine was written by staff officers who assumed that a heavy artillery battery could smoothly and effortlessly vanish when the stopwatch hit 3 minutes. The mathematical theory of survival assumed that mechanical friction did not exist. It did not account for what it physically took to drag thousands of pounds of metal out of a flooded trench in the final months of a collapsing war effort. The clean paper doctrine of the rapid displacement was about to collide with the decaying mechanical reality of the German army. To understand why the battery found abandoned in the Hürtgen forest failed, you must look closely at the physical object the crew was trying to save. A standard German 10.5 centimeter field howitzer was not a nimble weapon. It was a massive assembly of machined steel, weighing nearly 2 tons, and slammed down onto the towing pintles of waiting half-tracks. The drivers grind the gears, engines whining in protest as the tracks spin. When it fired, its heavy, spade-tipped trail legs dug deep into the earth, anchoring the weapon against the violent recoil. To pull those steel spades free in November required raw, agonizing physical labor. It meant 6 men straining with long pry bars in freezing rain, their boots slipping in the muck, their hands bleeding against cold metal. The clean mathematical doctrine of survival assumed a powerful mechanized prime mover was idling warmly nearby, ready to hook up the gun and drive away. In the early years of the war, that was the reality. But by the late autumn of 1944, the fully mechanized German army was largely an illusion. The logistical spine of the military was bleeding to death. Many artillery batteries had been reduced to relying on heavy draft horses. A single 10.5-centimeter gun required a team of at least 6 strong horses to pull it through the thick mud of a winter forest. But these animals were starving, exhausted, and dying of exposure, their hooves sinking deep into the freezing slush. If a unit was lucky enough to still possess half-tracks, the reality was often just as grim. The towing vehicles were dying from the inside out. A German prime mover in the Hurtgen had likely been operating for months without a proper engine overhaul. Its transmission gears were chipped and grinding, its tracks were worn smooth, and most critically, its fuel tanks were nearly dry. Bite into the mud and drag the heavy artillery pieces out of their firing pits. They reached the edge of a logging road. The Allied strategic bombing campaign had choked off the supply of synthetic petrol. Every drop of fuel burned to run away from an American barrage was fuel that could not be used to launch a counterattack. When the order to displace came, the panic was immediate. The drivers dropped the clutches. Worn transmissions screamed against the dead weight of 2 tons of steel stuck in freezing clay. Often, the tracks would simply spin, digging deeper into the muck until the gun crews had to push against the heavy wooden wheels of the howitzer. The mud acted like glue, fighting the retreat at every inch. A movement that the pristine staff manuals predicted would take 3 minutes, often stretched into 10 or 15 minutes of desperate, chaotic wrestling. This was the hidden genius of the American counter-battery system. Even when the American shells hit nothing but empty earth, they still inflicted heavy casualties. They did not destroy the steel of the gun, but they relentlessly degraded the machinery and muscle required to move it. Every forced displacement burned irreplaceable synthetic gasoline. Every frantic pull out of the mud strained a transmission that had no replacement parts waiting in the supply depot. Every midnight retreat exhausted the crews and broke the legs of the draft horses. The Americans were imposing a massive mechanical tax on the German artillery, simply by making them run. Eventually, the straining engines and screaming horses would succeed. The heavy guns would break free of the sucking mud,